Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining today. Richard is going to give a very brief introduction to this recording by Dr. Ayoma Atigale. He is actually traveling at the moment, so that's why his camera is off. His data is a bit better when his camera is off, but he will be able to introduce the speaker and the session. So thank you all so much for joining.
Okay, thank you all very much. I know this is, I might say that it's suboptimal that I'm not actually presenting, but I think it's probably better, in fact, that I present this recording. This was made at the Pathological Society Winter School 2024. Dr. Ayomi Atigale is an expert in lymphoid pathology, and she is one of the WHO authors of the classification of hematolymphoid tumours. She recently gave a talk on this programme on reactive conditions, and we're going to follow up today with low-grade B-cell neoplasms. This is a really important topic. She's a fantastic educator, as you know, so because I'm not able to present easily remotely, I'm putting this in instead. But I think it'll be better than anything I could present anyway. So, without further ado, can pass over to Dr. Atigale, and I will come back in at the end for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll start the recording now. Thank you all so much for joining.
So the topic of today's cases is essentially small B-cell lymphomas. And I say predominantly nodal because 3 of the 4 cases that I'm going to discuss with you today are node-based. Now, before I start the cases, I just thought I'll give you a little introduction. So lymphoma is a neoplasm of lymphoid cells, and it is a monoclonal proliferation. Some of the lymphomas are aggressive, others are indolent, but they may transform into a more aggressive form of the disease. Now, the very early classifications, lymphomas were classified into groups determined by cytology and pattern of growth. And we know now for many years that this method of classification is very imprecise. And for decades now, we've been using more than morphology and incorporating other parameters as well. So the WHO classification, all the iterations so far, use an integrated approach of morphology, immunophenotype, cell of origin, genetics, and clinical features to define disease entities. And this includes both lymphomas and leukemias. And essentially, it is a large number of distinct diseases, with each having a distinctive epidemiology and etiology. So this is the 5th edition of the WHO classification, which was due to come out in 2023, but now the Blue Book will be out hopefully in 2024. But this you can see there's a long list of individual entities, obviously classified in groups, but they are individual entities. And this is the long list of mature B-cell neoplasms. It's a slightly shorter list of mature T and NK cell neoplasms. But like all other tumor types, the changes that we see under the microscope are due to the underlying genetic changes which are transcribed, and then you have the protein expression, which ultimately all of this gives rise to the morphology or histology that we see under the microscope. So in addition to morphology, one of the key things in lymphoma diagnosis is the incorporation of immunophenotype. It is integral to making a diagnosis. And the immunophenotype can be either in the form of immunohistochemistry or flow cytometry. So these two methods, immunohistochemistry, as you know, provides us with an immunoarchitecture, essentially an architectural context to what cells are positive, what is negative in the background, and an architecture, overall architecture as well. Whereas flow cytometry has the benefit of being able to tell us the expression of more than one marker in a single cell, and also the strength of the expression, whether it's dim or bright, etc. So they tend to complement one another. And the ultimate, so the genetics and cytogenetics, which we now refer to as genomics, is useful not just in diagnosis in specific examples of cases where it's required for diagnosis, but also it helps us to make the diagnosis, but importantly also it provides us with prognostic factors, and also with provides clinicians with information regarding treatment response, etc. So the approach to diagnosis, it's to approach each individual case by going through this entire list of entities would be really difficult. So we have to start somewhere, and we start with morphology, and using morphology we tend to create a short list of possibilities and then work the case up further with the phenotype and genetics if needed. So when evaluating the case, you should always start, of course, with the clinical information, including the distribution of disease. I know that it's not always that we get this information as pathologists, but we should try to obtain it even if it's not provided voluntarily to us in each case. So the histology or morphology, now this I'm going to discuss with you lymph nodes and lymphoid tissue. So you have to look at the architecture and comment on whether it's preserved or effaced. And if it's effaced, is it partial effacement or complete effacement? And which compartment is affected and by what cellular infiltrate? So to know that a lymph node architecture is effaced, you should really know what the normal lymph node looks like. And this is my diagram of what a normal reactive lymph node looks like. I won't go into this in detail, but you'll have access to the talk, so you can sort of go back to this diagram. But in real life, this is the sort of reactive lymph node that you will see under the microscope. And you can still see the sinuses and the follicular architecture very nicely preserved, and the follicles confined to the cortex mostly. So morphologically, you have cytology and you have architecture. So architecturally, when you talk of effacement of lymph node architecture, we also have to comment on what the growth pattern is. So is it a nodular or a follicular growth pattern? Is it a mantle zone pattern? In other words, are there naked follicles come up against the infiltrate without an intervening residual mantle zone? Or is it a marginal zone, like you're seeing in this diagram here, where there's a proliferation which is outside of the mantle zone? Is it interfollicular, paracortical? Is it diffuse? Or is it residual sinuses? So all this has to be taken into consideration, and then we assess the cytological features. So cytological features, this is what I'm going to talk to you today on cases which are predominantly small lymphoid cells. So you have other cases which have infiltrate with large cells. They can either be a monotonous sheet of large cells or scattered large cells in a lymphocytic or a lymphohistiocytic background, or it could be polymorphous with lymphocytes admixed with an inflammatory background. So I'll just show you two examples. So one on the left has essentially predominantly small lymphoid cells. You will argue with me and say the one on the right is also predominantly small lymphoid cells, but there are characteristic large cells interspersed with these. So now this comes under a different set of differentials. So I will not be discussing that today. So I will not be discussing cases like the one on the right, and I'll stick to ones which are more like the cases on the case on the left. So to discuss cases predominantly small lymphoid cells, this is something that I thought I will just show you before I start showing you the cases. I'm not going to go through this in detail, but just to say that for your exam, for instance, it's quite useful to be able to construct a table such as this to use for even for your short cases, to learn to create a table with the immunohistochemical features of the cases, providing you with a differential diagnosis. So we'll start with the small B-cell lymphomas, case 1. So it's 67-year-old male, and the only information that you have is that it's a right inguinal lymph node excision. So there is effacement of nodal architecture, as you can see, and the infiltrate in this area at least looks diffuse. And you go slightly on medium power, you can appreciate that they are predominantly, they look as if they belong to the same population. They are all similar cells. They are all small cells. But interspersed, there are scattered cells which are histiocytes, and these histiocytes don't have cellular debris like the tingible body macrophages that you see in, sorry, I'm just going to see in the germinal center. So there are scattered histiocytes, but there is this sort of small to medium-sized lymphoid cells. And looking at higher power, these cells have irregular nuclei, and some of them have these indentations to the nucleus. So you can see, to work out whether a cell is large or small, it's quite useful to compare it with a histiocytic nucleus. So you can see this histiocytic nucleus, you can see that these are really small cells, and they would by no means be classified as large. So this is another view of the same section, but here you can see just on the left here that there is an area here, spherical area, where there are a mixture of small and large cells, but these cells look different from this population of cells that you're seeing here. And this, in fact, is a naked germinal center. Although you're not seeing tingible body macrophages, this is a naked germinal center within this infiltrate. And we'll see more of this. So on morphology alone, this is a diffuse, mostly diffuse, monotonous infiltrate of small to medium-sized cells with irregular indented nuclei that scatters histiocytes without cellular debris and a few residual naked what look like follicle centers amidst the infiltrate. Now, just a word of caution that, when you get a whole lymph node, unless it is sliced fresh, the fixation in the center can be suboptimal. And I just warn you against looking at the central area of this node, which you can see here, where the morphology is quite misleading. The cells get rounded up. Sometimes you see nucleoli, which are really shouldn't be that prominent, etc. So you have to focus on the areas which are better fixed when you evaluate cytologic detail. So the differential diagnosis. So the differential diagnosis, essentially, for your exam purposes, you should actually consider all the possible differential diagnosis of histologically low-grade lymphomas that can involve lymph nodes. And these tend to be B-cell lymphomas, so we'll focus on this. So mantle cell lymphoma essentially should be a uniform population of small to medium-sized cells, similar to this, but we would need immunoconfirmation. What about a follicular lymphoma? And what about that structure that we saw, which was going to be focally follicular? Well, even if that follicle didn't look the typical of a follicular lymphoma follicle center, it is something that you might have to consider anyway in a differential diagnosis of a set of small to medium size with these clefted, sort of cleaved, indented nuclei. What about nodal marginal zone lymphoma? Nodal marginal zone lymphoma also sometimes can, when the whole node is practically overrun by the infiltrate, although it should start out looking like this little image that I have shown you here, where it has a very nice marginal zone pattern of distribution, this is not always seen. So yes, you should include it in your differentials for immunohistochemical analysis. And then small lymphocytic leukemia, chronic lymphocytic leukemia, small lymphocytic lymphoma. The cells in this case that I'm currently discussing is irregular, and it doesn't have the cell mix, which we will see later on, of CLL, SLL. But again, it is not a bad thing to include this in your differentials. Consider it all in your differentials when you're investigating it immunohistochemically. So moving on to immunohistochemistry. So this is positive for CD20 and 79A. Always use more than one B-cell marker, particularly don't just stick to CD20, because there are rare instances where even T-cell lymphomas can aberrantly express CD20. So it's quite useful to confirm that it is indeed the B-cell in lineage. So I use the CD3 here, which highlights the T cells, because now I've used two markers, CD5 and CD43, which are normally expressed by T cells. And this is to show you that the CD5 is expressed not just in the T cells, but also in the background population. It is not staining for CD3. And similarly, the CD43. So it's CD5 and 43 positive. So the B cells that we saw here, in other words, are CD5 and 43 positive. So they are negative for CD23. There are some scattered cells which are positive, but they could be just residual. Sometimes mantle zone cells sometimes can express CD23, but otherwise it is confined essentially to the follicular dendritic cell meshworks, which are slightly expanded and broken up. This is also positive for IgD. Now the BCL6 and CD10 are negative in the infiltrate, but those residual naked germinal centers are positive. And those naked germinal centers are negative for BCL2, as we would expect in a reactive follicle center. But the infiltrate itself is BCL2 positive. Now, BCL2 is not a marker that helps you to differentiate one lymphoma from another. It only helps you to differentiate reactive follicle center from neoplastic. The cyclin D1 similarly is highlighted by the infiltrate that we are concerned about, but not marked. You can see the germinal center that we saw, follicle center, is negative. And SOX11, which is a nuclear stain again, is also positive. P53 has a wild type pattern of staining, And left one, which normally marks T cells, is negative in this case. And I'll tell you why I've used left one, because left one is a marker which is in this context of low-grade B-cell lymphomas is specific, relatively specific for CLL. So the Ki67, you can see the very high Ki67 is seen in the residual naked follicle centers, as we'd expect in reactive follicle centers. But the background Ki67 is also moderately high, and you can see here, you can see the Ki67, which is around 15% overall. So this diagnosis is mantle cell lymphoma, which is Ki67 is approximately 15%, and P53 has a wild type pattern of staining. Now, mantle cell lymphoma is a mature B-cell neoplasm that is derived from the mantle zone. So it's composed of small to medium-sized monomorphic cells, like we saw in our case, and it has this, in the classic mantle cell lymphoma, it has this sort of fish mouth almost type appearance with these indented nuclei. They express CD5, cyclin D1, and SOX11. And genetically, there are rearrangements of the CCND family. So most commonly CCND1. And the juxtaposition of CCND1 to IGH 1114 fusion is a genetic hallmark, and it's a primary event in the classic in mantle cell lymphoma, resulting in the overexpression of cyclin D1. So it accounts for only about 10% of the small B-cell lymphomas as a male predominance, and it involves lymph node, it can involve spleen, bone marrow, and the GI tract can be involved, giving rise to intestinal polyposis, which is called lymphomatous polyposis. Although it has small cells and you expect it to behave in an indolent way, it is moderately aggressive with a median survival, you can see, of 3 to 5 years. So there is no real transformation to large B-cell lymphoma like we see in other small B-cell lymphomas, but these may relapse with more aggressive disease, such as the blastoid and pleomorphic variants. So morphologically, they can be nodular. When they actually underline the nodules, you'll see these expanded, broken up follicle FDC meshworks, or it can be mantle zone like we saw focally in our case, or it can be diffuse monotonous infiltrate of these small to medium-sized cells with these indented nuclei. And typically you also see these histiocytes, but they don't have the debris of tingible body macrophages. And these are the aggressive variants. You don't have to know them, but just know that they exist, the blastoid and the pleomorphic. And you also have other variants such as small cell and marginal zone, like this is again at your level, I think not very important to know, except for the fact that they can also be mistaken for other forms of histologically low-grade B-cell lymphomas, and hence the importance of doing the immunohistochemistry to cover all. Rare cases of mantle cell lymphoma are cyclin D1 negative, and these are the ones which tend to harbor cyclin D2 or cyclin D3 rearrangement, but in these cases also SOX11 is useful in making the diagnosis. Now, there's another type of mantle cell lymphoma, which is now considered separately in the WHO, which is classification, which is leukemic non-nodal mantle cell lymphoma. And this is this. It involves blood, bone marrow, and spleen without significant lymphadenopathy. And they tend to resemble, they tend to be smaller in cells. They look like CLL type cells. And SOX11 is negative, and they tend to be the mutated immunoglobulin mutated, as opposed to the classic mantle cell lymphoma, which is unmutated. So the CD5 expression also is less commonly seen, and it has a better prognosis than the mantle cell lymphoma. So prognostic factors are essentially nodal versus non-nodal mantle cell lymphoma. The Ki67 is important information that you should provide because more than 30% is associated with worse outcome, and also the TP53 mutation status. So the diagnosis in this case is mantle cell lymphoma, and you should give these parameters, that is the Ki67 and the P53 status, by immunohistochemistry. So I'll move to the next case, which is a 65-year-old male axillary lymph node excision biopsy. So this again has a similar sort of theme. You can see there is complete replacement of the lymph node. So architecture is effaced, but there is some kind of nodularity that you can see here with some paler nodular areas. And if you look at, so the cell type actually does help you to hone down on a possible diagnosis. So looking at these, there are these small mature lymphocytes with this very clumped chromatin. And you're also seeing, in addition, in the paler areas, there is an increasing number of medium to large, they're scattered large. So they're very, even in this, you can see they're mainly small to medium sized cells, but they're scattered larger cells. And if you look a little closer, so the ones I've highlighted in yellow are the small mature lymphocytes, and the ones in blue are the medium sized lymphoid cells with the central nucleoli. That is, those are pro-lymphocytes, and the larger lymphocytes you can see here are the para-immunoblasts, which again has a prominent central nucleolus. So it's this mixture of cell types that help us to make the diagnosis. So these pale nodular areas, which an increase in prolymphocytes and para-immunoblasts, are called proliferation centers. So morphologically, we have effaced nodal architecture, vaguely nodular due to those nodular pale areas. And these proliferation centers are not follicles, but if they're very pronounced, as I'll show you another case very quickly, they are referred to as pseudo follicles. And these proliferation centers are unique to chronic lymphocytic leukemia / small lymphocytic lymphomas. Chronic lymphocytic leukemia is a leukemic type of this disease, and small lymphocytic lymphoma is the when you don't have a leukemic phase. So it essentially affects lymph nodes. So this is CD20 positive. Now you can see on immunohistochemistry, this is actually the stains done on the same case, but they look a little different. It's not always, if you did flow cytometry, you'll see a dim CD20, but this is something that you don't necessarily appreciate by immunohistochemistry. They're also positive for CD79A. And you can see this is the CD3 and CD5, so it's positive for CD5, you can see, compared to the CD3. It's also positive for CD23, but CD23 tends to be stronger in the medium and larger cells. So there is a variability in the staining that you see in CD23. It's positive for CD43. This is again compared to the CD3, so CD43 normally is expressed by T cells. And left one you can see is also positive in this case. So I think diagnosis is not that difficult. Now, the cyclin D1 is usually negative in these cases, but in this particular case, and you can see it in the proliferation centers and the proliferation center cells, you can see some weak staining. Now, this doesn't make this mantle cell lymphoma. So MUM1 tends to be positive in the areas of higher proliferation, so in the proliferation centers, and the P53 in this case is wild type. So the positive markers in this case, the B cell pan-B markers are positive. It's positive for 5, 23 left one, CD43, and MUM1 is positive in proliferation centers. Cyclin D1 is mostly negative, but there's weak positive in a proportion of the proliferation center cells. CD10 and B is negative. BCL6 I didn't show you, it was weak / negative. BCL6 is only worth talking about if it is strongly positive. SOX11 was negative and CD3 negative. So P53 has a wild type staining pattern, and there were no underlying FTC meshworks either on the CD23 or the CD21 stain. So the diagnosis here is CLL / SLL. So the reason why you say CLL / SLL is because you don't know what the leukemic status is. So it could be CLL involving lymph nodes, or it could be SLL without a leukemic component. So this is very quickly another case to show you that you can have this sort of very nodular appearance, and you can see it on the CD20 also. It really looks very nodular, and on the CD23 you can see the weak staining in the smaller cells and the strong staining in the proliferation centers, and the MUM1 again and the Ki67 matching the proliferation centers. So CLL is a neoplasm composed of small monomorphic mature B cells that co-express CD5 and 23. Now you must have a monoclonal B cell count of at least 5 to the 10 to the power 9 per liter, with characteristic morphology and immunophenotype of CLL in the peripheral blood in order to call it CLL. So if the count is less than this, but without lymphadenopathy, organomegaly, or any other extramedullary disease, we just call it MBL, or monoclonal B cell lymphocytosis. Whereas if there is a clonal CLL count is less than 5, but you have nodal, splenic, or other extramedullary involvement, then we call it SLL. So CLL is the most common leukemia in the West. It's rare in Asian countries, and this low incidence is maintained even in immigrant populations, in migrant populations. So there's a dramatic increase with age, and the median age of diagnosis is 70 years, slight male predominance. In most cases, diagnosis is incidental. Now, in cases where these lymph nodes are biopsied, like the new node you have here, is either because the patient had a CLL and people didn't bother to look at to get the to check whether there was lymphocytosis in the peripheral blood. And believe me, this happens quite a few times, especially in a non-hematology setting. In when there is like you get these from sarcoma surgeons or other teams, not people who are managing lymphoma, or if it is SLL without a leukemic component, or for instance, if there are some atypical features and they be, or maybe say in breast cancer when they've done they've had lymphadenopathy and incidentally you come across this when they're looking for sentinel nodes, etc. So it's often an incidental diagnosis. So the diagnosis is made on peripheral blood with characteristic flow and also characterized by flow and also by molecular genetics. For instance, the immunoglobulin heavy chain variable mutational status, and also the cytogenetic abnormalities, recurrent mutations, etc. The trephine is performed before commencing treatment, otherwise it's not done for diagnostic purposes, and also if there are atypical features. You do a trephine before starting treatment and also as a response to therapy. So CLL, you have CLL, SLL, you have the unmutated and the mutated. So they are about 50-50. And the importance in knowing this is the immunoglobulin mutated cases have a better outcome as opposed to the unmutated cases which have a poorer outcome. So this is routinely tested for. So this is the typical flow cytometry of CLL, SLL. And as I said, you see this weak CD20 and surface immunoglobulin, something that we don't really appreciate on immunohistochemistry. And immunohistochemistry, I've gone through this. And the most common cytogenetic abnormalities are deletion of 13q, trisomy 12, 11q deletion, and 17p deletion. So these have prognostic implications. So these are just the most common ones. NGS has identified recurrent mutations, and these also are reported on. These are not widely available necessarily, but it's available in the genomic hubs now. Some of these mutations are associated with inferior response or resistant to therapies. For instance, Notch1 mutation CLL is has resistance to rituximab. So in terms of progression, clinical progression is often associated with an increase in proliferative activity, and these proliferation centers can enlarge and coalesce. And the outcome is sort of intermediate between typical CLL and Richter transformation to large B-cell lymphoma, but it's important to know this, that this sort of intermediate phase exists, and sometimes you can get a biopsy of this where you see like a large proliferation center, coalescing proliferation centers, but still it has a mix of cell types, like you're seeing here, but a prominence of the large cells in the proliferation centers is our paraimmunoblasts and the prolymphocytes. In contrast, if it actually transforms, you just see sheets of large atypical cells, and in time, up to 8% of cases can transform. They are mostly diffuse large B-cell lymphoma, but very rarely you get the Hodgkin, classic Hodgkin lymphoma. Most of the diffuse large B-cell lymphomas are clonally related, and these have a poor outcome as opposed to the clonally unrelated cases, which behave like a de novo diffuse large B-cell lymphoma. So the diagnosis in this case is CLL/SLL. So the next case is a 71-year-old right inguinal lymph node excision biopsy. So this again, you might not be sure whether its architecture is effaced or not, but you can't see any sinuses. The infiltrate is extending out into the fat, and there is a dense, what looks like a dense population of follicles, which are very closely opposed with one another. So this architecture is effaced by this process. And you can see the infiltrate is extending, these follicles are extending into the perinodal fat. And that is a feature that you shouldn't see in a reactive lymph node. There's some variation in size, and you are seeing a fairly, there's a mantle zone, which you can recognize, which is something that is not typical of follicular lymphoma, for instance, but you are seeing it in this case. But nevertheless, let's look at the follicles themselves. So if you look at the follicle here, you don't see tingible, this is quite a large follicle center, but there are no tingible body macrophages, and this seems to have a predominance of smallish lymphocytes, and we'll come to the irregular cleaved lymphocytes with some scattered larger lymphocytes as well. So the question is, are we dealing with a follicular lymphoma? Is this reactive follicular hyperplasia, or is this another histologically low-grade B-cell lymphoma? So let's just start with these two problems. So the sinuses are not patent, it's densely packed numerous follicles. Infiltrate goes beyond the capsule, but there is a mantle zone which is fairly well formed. So these first three features favor follicular lymphoma. The mantle zone being well formed is not typical, but you do see it in some cases. So this is on the right side, this is the reactive follicular hyperplasia that I showed you earlier, and you can see that there's far more, the density of the follicles is much more in this case, and you can see in the reactive follicular hyperplasia there's patency of the sinus, and there is nothing going beyond this. So look at the follicle themselves. So now on the right side you're seeing a hyperplastic follicle, and this is to compare and contrast. So in this case 3, the follicle consists mainly of centrocytes. So they are the small cleaved cells. They look like centrocytes. There are some scattered larger cells. We'll see a higher power view in a minute. But in the hyperplastic follicle, you're seeing this zonation with the centroblast dark zone on one side and then the light zone here. And you're seeing these nice tingible body macrophages. So this is a typical reactive hyperplastic follicle. So this cells are mainly these small cleaved cells, but there are also scattered large cells as well. But the predominance is are these small centrocytes. So this is an example of on the right side is a case which I would tell you is a follicular lymphoma, where you're seeing these are centroblasts and you're seeing these cleaved cells. So although not every follicular lymphoma looks the same, the cell composition on the RCase3 and this follicular lymphoma is very similar. So again, there are no tingible body macrophages here. You can see tingible body macrophages in a follicular lymphoma. The higher grade it goes when there are more centroblasts. So what about another histologically low-grade B-cell lymphoma? So on the right is an example of a case, not the case that I shared with you, but this is another mantle cell lymphoma where it has a nodular growth pattern. So sometimes on the growth pattern itself, I say, although the case on the left and right look very different, you can't necessarily say. But in our particular case, you have an intact mantle zone, which is not that usual, I say, for follicular lymphoma, but in this case, it is so. So it's not likely that this is going to be mantle cell lymphoma, which should have either a mantle zone pattern, but you shouldn't have a residual normal mantle zone. So the cell composition in our case has a mixed, although it is predominance of these small cleaved cells, there are quite a number, I mean, there are in the minority and less than 15 definitely, but there are these larger cells as well. Whereas in the mantle cell lymphoma, you get these scattered histiocytes, but otherwise the cell composition is very monotonous. So this is the case of the mantle zone pattern. Again, this is the naked follicle center, yes? So what about a marginal zone lymphoma? So marginal zone lymphoma, you should have, it can, as we'll see later, the follicle center can be colonized, but if you're lucky, you'll see a follicle center, you'll see the mantle zone, and then you'll see the marginal zone distribution, which is not seen here. The main infiltrate seems to be, it's in outside as well, but there is a lot going on in the follicle itself. And every single follicle is involved like this. So CLL, we'll come to this later, again, in other examples as well, but in CLL, SLL, you can see the proliferation centers are composed, you have the small cells, but you have the larger cells, and they have the central nucleolus. So in these examples of the large cells in follicular lymphoma, either in follicular lymphoma or in reactive follicles, centroblast, the nucleoli are located peripherally mainly. So you don't see the central one nucleolus. So CD20, you can see this is not a reactive lymphoid hyperplasia because you're seeing a lot of B cells outside the follicles, and that is a mark to say that this is very unlikely to be a reactive process. So then you have CD10, you can see this here, which is highlighting the follicles, the nodular areas, but also you're seeing this infiltrate in between the follicles that are also coming up with CD10 in a proportion of the cells. So you can see that CD10 is seen in these nodular follicular areas, but in the background, there is some downregulation of the of the CD10, but it is expressed. So that again, you shouldn't have, because in a reactive setting where you have reactive follicular hyperplasia, you shouldn't see these CD10 positivity in between the follicles. BCL6 is similar. There's downregulation in the interfollicular area. Then we come to BCL2. Now, BCL2 is quite important, and always when you're looking at the BCL2, compare it with the T cell marker, because the T cells normally express BCL2, and actually most lymphoid cells express BCL2, except the germinal center B cells, normal germinal center B cells, which are negative for BCL2. So this is clearly BCL2 positive. So the CD21 highlights, and the 23 also highlights the FDC meshworks that underlie these nodules. So these are actually follicles. And the Ki67 is moderate in the follicles and low in the interfollicular area. And this is in contrast with the reactive follicle centers in case 1 in mantle cell lymphoma, where they had a mantle zone pattern. So in reactive follicles, you'll get a very high proliferation, and sometimes you can see the zonation as well. So the diagnosis in this case is follicular lymphoma in grade 1 to 2, and I'll come to this in a minute. So the WHO 2023, if it is the typical follicular lymphoma grades 1, 2, and 3A, we just refer to it as classic follicular lymphoma. So the grading of follicular lymphoma now, the new WHO classification is optional if it's grades 1, 2, and 3A. So grades 1 and 2 are low grade, so it has to have up to 15 centroblasts per Hyparc field, and in grade 3, in 3A, it has more than 15 centroblasts, but there will still be centrocytes present, whereas in 3B, you have solid sheets of centroblasts. So these are the grades of follicular lymphoma. I don't need to go through this in detail, but so the genetics of follicular lymphoma, the IgV genes show extensive ongoing somatic hypermutations, because, this is a germinal center lymphoma. And the 1418 translocation involving IGH and BCL2 genes is characteristic, because BCL2 is, as you know, is an anti-apoptotic gene, and by this translocation, so this is the apoptosis is inhibited, as opposed to what should happen in a reactive germinal center. So this translocation is much less frequent in grade 3B. In addition to T1418, because T1418 you see in the precursor lesion also of follicular lymphoma, you need other genetic alterations for it to become overt follicular lymphoma. So the indolent follicular lymphoma is regarded as grades 1 to 2 and 3A. And grade 3B is biologically closer to diffuse large B-cell lymphoma than to other follicular lymphomas, and therefore, because the natural history is also different from other follicular lymphomas and resembles the diffuse large B-cell lymphoma. In up to a third of cases of follicular lymphoma, transformation occurs to diffuse large B-cell lymphoma. So transformation is also typically associated with additional genetic abnormalities. And if a MYC rearrangement occurs, the combination of a MYC rearrangement and a BCL2 rearrangement makes this very aggressive. So this is another example of a follicular lymphoma on the right-hand side, and I just thought I'll share with you other follicular lymphomas where the architecture, you don't get this well-formed mantle zone. You can see this here, the follicular, it is follicular, but the follicularity is maybe not as obvious as you're seeing in our case. And this was the follicular lymphoma that I showed you earlier. To compare with, and here you can see in this particular example, you can see the centroblasts with these. I always refer to these as like a potato, with like the eyes of the potato, because they're, since centroblasts, they're peripherally located nuclei. So this again is similar, but at the same time, each case is very different. So the grade is similar in both cases. These are grade 1 to 2. So this is follicular lymphoma, grade 1 to 2, or classic follicular lymphoma. Moving on to our final case is a 55-year-old male with gastric biopsy. So this is a gastric biopsy, and there's a very dense lymphoid infiltrate, which is partially effacing some of the crypts, as you can see. And if you go higher up, you can actually see there's a eosinophilia to some of these crypt epithelial cells, and there's infiltration by the lymphoid population. And we'll see some more of that in a minute. So this density of lymphoid infiltrate is something that you shouldn't normally see in a gastric biopsy. So the reactive lymphoid aggregates, if you see them, they are basal and they don't extend like this up between the crypts. So this lymphoid infiltrate is far too dense with effacement of architecture extending between glands. So this is never going to be reactive. So this is going to be lymphoma. So you have to, when you get this dense and infiltrate, you have to consider histologically low-grade B-cell lymphoma. So you think of the site and it's a gastric, you think it could be a gastric lymphoma, extranodal marginal zone lymphoma, mucosa-associated lymphoid tissue. Sorry, there's a mistake here. It should be mucosa-associated lymphoid tissue, Malt lymphoma. And you also have to consider other small B-cell lymphomas that can involve the stomach, usually as a part of disseminated disease. So just because it's a stomach and there is this, what looks like a low-grade, histologically low-grade or small B-cell lymphoma, it doesn't necessarily mean it is always Malt lymphoma. So CLL and SLL, you'll see small mature lymphocytes mixed with prolymphocytes and paraimmunoblasts. Mantle cell lymphoma, the classic mantle cell lymphoma, you should see uniform small to medium sized cells with the indented nuclei. But some cases can be small cell or marginal zone like. You might see the histiocyte. The issue is that, sometimes when there is this kind of infiltrate, the architectural, this looks just like a diffuse infiltrate. You can't really recognize whether there's no marginal zone pattern to it. There's no follicularity to it that you can appreciate. And, so it could be any one of these lymphomas really. And so follicular lymphoma, the follicularity may not be that obvious. And of course, we are dealing with extranodal, we have to consider extranodal marginal zone lymphoma. So problem is that the marginal zone pattern may not be that obvious and the follicles may be overrun and colonized. And if you go down, you'll see that these cells can be centrocyte-like, medium-sized, and maybe even monocytoid, and there can be scattered large cells. Now, in the epithelial tissues, the neoplastic cells typically infiltrate the epithelium. So they form these what you call lymphoepithelial lesions. And these lymphoepithelial lesions are best seen by a pancytokeratin. And you can see it here, even on H&E here. But they are characteristic, but again, they are not specific for Malt lymphoma. You can see it in other B-cell lymphomas infrequently. And this is sort of a textbook example of the cells that you can sometimes see almost like a fried egg here with this monocytoid cytoplasm here, their cytoplasmic clearing. So this is an example that I showed you earlier when I was talking about architecture. So this is the follicle center, mantle zone, and marginal zone. Unfortunately, not all lymphomas read the textbook. So when you see it under the microscope, it's more like the case that I've given you. So the neoplastic cells in Malt lymphoma will reside in the marginal zones of reactive B-cell follicles, and they'll extend into the interfollicular area as well as colonize. So they cause both follicular colonization. When both happen, then it's not always easy to recognize the follicles. So you can see on the CD20, there's a dense infiltrate, and this is infiltrating between crypts. So this is no way is this going to be reactive. So it's a bit like saying it has moved out of a compartment where it shouldn't be. So like in follicular lymphoma, the B cells, you see it outside the follicles. In this same way, you're seeing it where it shouldn't be, between crypts. And you're seeing these lymphoepithelial lesions even in this case. And they're CD43 positive. BCL2 positive, again, I said it doesn't help you to differentiate one from the other. And on the CD21, sometimes what happens is there is the underlying follicles, FDC meshworks expand and are disrupted. So CD10 and BCL6 are negative, so this is not a follicular lymphoma. And there is some expression of kappa, and when you look at this light chains or even heavy chains, when you're assessing them, you should look for this perinuclear staining. Yeah? So it's kappa restricted. So further immunochemistry that I've done but not shown is cyclin D1, CD5 and 23, they're negative. H. pylori was negative, but I've shown you an example of a positive case. And CD138, there are only a few plasma cells. In some cases, this can be prominent and part of the neoplastic process, in which case it'll be light chain restricted. So it's positive for CD43, but CD43 doesn't narrow it down particularly in terms of lymphoma type. And BCL2 also doesn't narrow it down as lymphoma type, but what is useful is the negative markers. And that is really what helps you in this case to make the diagnosis. And so these are the features that you saw. So this is the table I was referring to. So in Malt lymphoma, CD5 is negative, rarely can be positive, 23 is typically negative, SOX11 and cyclin D1 negative, CD10, BCL6 negative. 43 may be positive in some Malt lymphomas. Actually, it's more useful to distinguish reactive from neoplastic rather than actually a lymphoma type. And left one is also negative in this case. One of the problems that you might have is you might have some follicles where there is upregulation of germinal center markers when the malt lymphoma can colonize the follicle. But I'm sure at the exam they won't give you such a case. So diagnosis here is malt lymphoma. So malt lymphoma is a primary extranodal indolent B-cell lymphoma. Cytoarchitectural features resemble a Pear's patch and prototypical, which is prototypical normal malt. And this typically arises from marginal zone B cells or acquired malt, often in association with underlying chronic inflammatory disorder. So when you come to differential diagnosis, you have to consider reactive lymphoid hyperplasia when you have basal lymphoid aggregates with a little bit of B cells trickling out from them, and CD43 is quite useful. IgD is not done routinely in laboratory, so I didn't talk about this, but these cells are IgD negative, whereas mantle zone cells are IgD positive. So that is also quite helpful. IgM positive, IgD negative cells spilling out into the, out of the follicle into the outside of the mantle zone. So light chain restriction is helpful. And maybe better if it's the plasma cells also neoplastic and light chain restricted, and of course other B-cell lymphomas. So the etiology of this is in many malt lymphomas as an underlying chronic inflammatory process. In gastric malt lymphoma, the culprit can be Helicobacter gastritis, and salivary malt is Sjogren's syndrome, and thyroid malts Hashimoto's thyroiditis. So these are the sites that can be involved. They're usually indolent. Recurrences may involve other extranodal sites, and protracted remissions can be induced by antibiotic therapy. This is not only just in the stomach. Now they've identified possible culprits at other sites as well, and transformation to diffuse large B-cell lymphoma occur in less than 10%. So the final diagnosis here is malt lymphoma. And I'll leave you with this chart of which is quite useful actually for you to, as I said, practice constructing. And that's it. And I finish here. So can I explain the use of IgD? So IgD is something I don't think a lot of laboratories use, but I was trained by Professor Peter Isaacson, and he used to use IgD a lot. And IgD is very useful because it provides you an architectural context. The architectural context is that it highlights the mantle zone. So it tells you, if the mantle zone is intact, it tells you where the infiltrate is in relation to the follicle. And that is why it's quite useful. And in the case of malt lymphoma, for instance, or marginal zone lymphomas, some can be IgD positive. But if you have an IgD negative population of B cells, which is spilling out into the outside of the mantle zone, then you start thinking, could this be lymphoma? So that's in that context. In the case of the gastric malt lymphoma, that was the context.
Well, thank you very much for your attention, everyone. I hope that was useful. Are there any particular questions that you would like me to answer? If you either raise your hand or put them in the chat. Are there any questions from the audience? Crystal clear.
I don't see any in the chat.
No. Okay. Well, I'll just give another. Any questions about diagnosis of B-cell tumors that Dr. Ategali didn't point out? I think that was it is a really good talk that she gave, and that would cover 95% of all B-cell tumors that you're ever likely to see. So I hope that's proved useful. If there aren't any further questions, then it just remains for me to thank virtually Dr. Ategali, to thank Ava and Diagnexia for their continued support of the programme, to thank you all for your time, because I know that you're all very busy and your time is very precious, and I look forward to seeing you all again at the same time in whichever territory you're in next week. Next week it'll be Dr. Lena Joseph, who is a cardiothoracic pathologist, a colleague of mine in South Manchester in the United Kingdom, and she'll be talking on interstitial lung disease.